the introduction. I'm waiting for the next slides. Yeah, and I would start with the housekeeping rules. So first of all, the cameras and microphones are switched off for the whole webinar. Please keep them switched off. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box tool. We have reserved time for answering the questions, and we will have the expert from the European Investment Bank. So please use the chance to ask questions. If the session ends unexpectedly, please reconnect using the same link. The presentation and recording of this webinar will be available for download at EU4Green website in a few days after this webinar. And the copyrights of the webinar belong to our agency, European Environment Agency Austria. Apologies. The agenda for today's webinar, the short introduction, and then we will go through the circular economy finance definition to understand how finance sector defines circular economy finance. And afterwards, we will look through circular economy financing approaches, what the market proposes, which solutions are proposed currently. And afterwards, we will have case study from the European Investment Bank, and we will close the webinar. The learning objectives of the webinars are to gain the insight. We want you after the webinar to understand how finance sector approaches financing of circular economy from definition to practical project analysis. We want you to gain insights from the European Investment Bank on how some projects are already financed in the region. We want you also to participate in interactive discussions and Q&A sessions with experts. We want to enable you for financing of circular economy projects and approaching financial solutions. And we want to we will provide you an overview of different sources where you can get more information. I will talk a couple of words about the EU4Green project. So our project runs from 2022 till 2025. It's funded by European Commission and partially by Austrian Development Agency, and it covers 6 economies in the Western Balkans: Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. The objective of the project is to support the 6 economies of Western Balkans on their accession journey, and specifically for accelerating green agenda implementation. The implementing partner of this project is Environment Agency Austria, and I will tell you a couple of words about what the agency is. We are the most important environmental expert organization in Austria and also one of the leading expert environmental organizations in Europe. We work closely, for example, with European Environmental Agency. We have 40 years of experience. This year we celebrate the 40th anniversary. We have more than 600 experts, also our own laboratories, work with 55 scientific disciplines, work in 20 languages or more, and with turnover of 85 million euro, working in more than 60 countries. And we have 2 managing directors, the ladies Verena and Hingelkart. So now we can move on to the first session, which is on circular economy finance definition. So how the circular economy finance is defined. So first, we should look at the EU circular economy strategies and policies, because they define and they conceptualize circular economy, what the circular economy is. And they also provide suggestions for or definitions for circular monitoring and reporting indicators. So the circular economy policies and strategies, they answer the question what? They create demand. And then afterwards, what contributes is the EU Sustainable Finance Framework, because In sustainable finance framework, also circular economy is considered, and in sustainable finance tools and reporting requirements, circular economy is reflected. So also some language definitions are used. So this sustainable finance framework, which also involves, for example, reporting directives like CSRD and EU taxonomy, it's the enabling tool. So it answers the question how. And both of them, they contribute to definitions used in EU funding programs. So they inform the EU funding programs. These are the two pillars which are creating the definition of circular economy finance. And then we have the third pillar, which is from the initiatives by different stakeholders in the finance market. Also, for example, international standards like International Capital Market Association or ISO, also international initiatives like UNEP-FI or multilateral development banks standards developed, IPSF, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, and different circular finance guidelines which help the market how to do it in practice. So this is answering the question how, it's on informing. So all these three pillars, they add up to financing circular economy projects, and in this way they are creating the supply. I think we need to go to the other slide, please. Yeah, so just to illustrate, on the first pillar on circular economy definition, we have, for example, the definition which is used by EU Parliament, where you see the different stages or strategies of circular economy, starting from raw materials, go to sustainable design and production, and then distribution, then consumption, collection, and waste management and residual waste. And most commonly, in respect of financing, when we talk about circular economy, most commonly the project would be considered about recycling and waste management. However, it's not everything about circular economy, because you see there are other many stages. And interestingly enough, that the most impactful stage would be sustainable design. So if transition to circular economy would be done at the phase of sustainable design, that 80% of waste would be decreased. So this is one of the definition. And the next one, what is commonly used in European Union, are the 9 R's, which can be also categorized by before use, refuse, rethink, reduce strategies, during use, retain, reuse, or share, repair, and remanufacture, and after use, recycle and return. So these two definitions, this slide just represents what how to visualize what is done on the first pillar. Next slide, please. And of course, the most important policy in the European Union is Circular Economy Action Plan, which was adopted in 2020. Additionally to the strategies which were reviewed now on the previous slide, the Circular Economy Action Plan defines key product value chains. So these are the most important, impactful industry sectors, transitioning to circularity of which would provide most impact in respect of the result on the decreasing of the CO2 emission and environmental impact. So this is also answering the question what and creating demand. Next slide, please. And then when we look at the finance sector, European Commission created circular economy categorization system in 2020. This circular economy categorization system, it also involves, you can see on the right, the R's, repair, reuse, redistribution, refurbish, and it also has the three phases: the circular design model, the same like before use, optimal use model, which would be during use, and value recovery model, which would be after use. However, additionally, it has circular support models, which would be management support. You can put here also some reforms or regulations and policies which are created by states. This categorization system was used for creating circular economy criteria for EU taxonomy. And this categorization system is also used by international finance institutions and by different banks to start working with circular economy projects. So this slide, it answers the question how. It is the enabling. So on the next slide, you can see that there were different assessments of financing gap for circular economy in the EU. Summa Equity, for example, in 2023 assessed the need as 230 billion investment opportunity by 2040, which is not that much. A platform on sustainable finance provides assessment of sustainable capital flows on 2 years basis, and this year they published a report where they wrote that the gap for circular economy accounts to 28 billion per annum. Currently, it's 18. The investment is 18 billion per annum, and it should be increased by 57%. Then there is a study which will be published soon, either in November or December this year, by EIB and European Commission, where the total investment needs by 2040 is assessed as 1.2 to 1.4 trillion. And approximate annual financing is necessary at the level of 82 billion. Also, there is a global research by Circular Economy where they assess the need in EU in dollars as 15.5 billion. So what it means, it just shows that there is a diversity of data sources and methodologies in scope, and also that assessment of circular economy requires access to multiple data sources, and it is very complex. There is no common methodology, there is no common approach. Also, another thing is that, for example, in platform of sustainable finance, some circular economy financing could be included under climate adaptation. Therefore, also the amounts could differ. So we understand that circular economy is a cross-cutting issue and sector agnostic, and therefore under some sectors which are already included under other environmental topics, circular economy can also be relevant. Okay, when we go to the next slide, we can see that the statement from UNEP FI about the importance of finance sector, important role of finance sector. The role of finance sector is not only in providing financing, but also in helping the market shifts. We support in implementation of reforms, driving policy changes and industry standards. UNEP FI mentions some impactful sectors like agri-food systems, buildings and construction, textiles and plastics. And comparatively to Circular Economy Action Plan of EU, it's less impactful sectors mentioned than in the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. UNEP has a Circular Economy Working Group, so they do researches, they also provide some standards for financial institutions. We also see on the right that there are different IFIs like European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, World Bank Group, also European Investment Bank. They also contribute to improving the definitions or adding clarity for financing of circular economy projects, and in this respect to accelerate to grow financing of circular economy. So these three IFIs, they develop different standards For example, EBRD together with Dutch banks like ING, IBM, AMRO introduced circular economy finance definition and guidelines in 2018. And the same year, also EIB has developed their first circular economy finance guide, which was updated recently in 2023. And IFC, as a part of the World Bank Group, has published the harmonized guidelines for circular economy this year, based on the work of different initiatives and institutions done earlier. And some of practicalities from these approaches of international finance institutions will be presented later today. And please use the chance also to ask questions specifically to EIB. So this is answering the question how it's informing. So on the next slide, we can, when we talk about EU support for circular economy in Western Balkans, we shall mention two possibilities. So Western Balkans Investment Framework, which is the vehicle used by European Commission for the financing to be allocated in the Western Balkans to different projects, also to regional projects. And they have twofold objectives: to address the extensive infrastructure investment needs and to support the EU accession process. So relevant WBIF investment priority is environment and climate. Here you can see also the definition on the right bottom part, that the circular economy area of intervention is to support waste management, recycling, sustainable production, and efficient use of resources for green and climate neutral economy. And additionally, you have access to EU funding programs. In general, Western Balkans have access to 17 EU funding programs, 2 of which, LIFE and Horizon, are relevant for circular economy. The objectives of EU funding programs also to prepare Western Balkans economies for full membership upon accession. It entails also financing of some projects, infrastructure, but also technical assistance and reforms. Next slide, please. To go a little bit more into details of the two mentioned programs, Horizon Europe and LIFE. So Horizon Europe provides mostly grants complemented with dedicated financial instruments. The applicants can be from business environment, from public authorities, NGOs, and research institutions. And the pillars, specifically Pillar 3, is relevant for circular economy because it supports all stages of innovations. And as we know, also circular economy depends a lot on the innovative solutions which need to scale up, need to be tested and then scaled up. So Horizon can be used for support from research and development on the scientific underpinnings of breakthrough technologies, validation and demonstration, and then development and scaling up of startups. And then when we look at LIFE program, this is the program, the general objective of which is to contribute to shift towards sustainable, circular, energy efficient, renewable energy based, climate neutral and resilient economy. So the types of projects that can be covered are circular economy and waste, air quality, climate change mitigation and adaptation, clean energy, and environmental and climate governance. Also, public and private legal entities can apply for getting funds under LIFE program. And the funding instruments, it entails both grants and costs. And covering the costs. We include here the links in our presentation to the programs. You can check those links also because, for example, specifically on LIFE, they have a lot of webinars and presentations provided to build capacities. And on the next slide, you can have an example of what is presented during those webinars. For example, there is detailed description of which activities can be considered under recovery and resource from waste topic, like waste electrical and electronic equipment, batteries, accumulators, end-of-life vehicles, plastic, bio-waste, the textiles, critical raw materials, packaging, so sorting and recycling. So you can find more information there. And with this, I hand over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. Also, very welcome and good morning from my side. My colleague Hannah and I are going to talk a little bit about circular economy financing approaches in the next slides and also give you some examples. All right, on this side, I want to start with a definition of circular economy finance. As Olga mentioned earlier, there is not this one definition. We're still like evolving a lot. Yeah, but the UNEP FI, so the finance initiative, defines circular economy finance as any type of instrument in which the investments will be applied exclusively to finance, refinance, invest in, or insure in part or in full new and or existing eligible companies or projects that advance the circularity of our economies. We divided the financing options into on the left side, financing options, on the right side, reducing risk options. The financing options, we have the classic ones, equity and bonds, which are capital market instruments. Then bonds, starting from green to transition, sustainable, and or sustainably linked bonds. And then we have green and sustainably linked loans, which are very common financing options, usually for traditional or larger scale projects or investment programs. And then we have alternative financing options that are usually for risky or non-economically viable options, project or options, yeah, which might often be the case with circular economy projects, as they don't have the same growth and profit margins predictions as other projects. And in the alternative financing options, we have impact investing, blended finance, and public-private partnerships. I'm gonna talk to you about all those financing options in more detail on the following slides. And to reduce risk, we have investment guarantees, which can be provided by any sort of stakeholders, from governments to government agencies, multilateral and international institutions, insurance companies, banks, and or financial institutions. And yeah, insurance, you probably are aware of, works the same also for those kind of projects. And then we have financial leasing, which is a type of long-term financing arrangement between the lessor and the lessee. The lessor purchases an asset and allows the other party, the lessee, to use it in exchange for regular payments. Yeah, so which transfers the risks, but also the rewards of ownership. Yeah. Okay, then we go to the next slides, where I'm going to talk quickly about equity. Equity is a form of ownership. Equity comes with a claim on profits or losses of the project and or company. We have three types of equity: public equity, which is investing in shares of listed companies, in our case focus on circular economy; private equity, so direct investment in private firms or projects developing circular economy technologies in our case; and then we have venture capital, which is usually for projects with high risk, and usually for early stage fundings for startups, for circular economy solutions, for innovative projects. Yeah. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about bonds, sustainable bonds. Bonds are debt securities sold to investors, which have to be repaid with interest, so a kind of a loan. When like bonds are often used if a bank loan is insufficient to finance projects, so corporations or sub-national governments can issue bonds to provide an alternative to attract capital. Compared to regular bonds, we have the sustainable bonds that also have non-financial use of proceeds clauses, and financial incentives can be linked to successful outcomes in the sustainable linked bonds. If you want more information, the detailed information, please always read the bond prospectus. It needs to contain detailed information about the issue and the financial and economic activities, and also any information on specific risk reducing factors that lower or eliminate environmental risks. In comparison to green and transition bonds, which are strongly linked to financing environmental and sustainable projects, sustainably linked loans and bonds give more flexibility to the borrower or bond issuer to spend the capital for organizational sustainability purposes. So sustainably linked loans and bonds focus more on the companies that improve their environmental and social performance. On the right side, we have a graph from the UNECE from the Accelerating the Transition Towards a Circular Economy guideline, which shows a little bit the use of proceeds for the different kinds of bonds. We have green bonds, transition bonds, and sustainably linked also loans and bonds. Green bonds can be used for any kind of circular economy activity, so waste reduction, recycling and management, resource efficiency, eco-efficient products, pollution prevention and control. With transition bonds, they focus a lot on emission-intensive industries that want to transition, so basically reduce their emissions and decarbonize. So, for example, for a cement industry. In sustainability linked loans and bonds, they are linking the financial activity or like the linking KPIs to and the achievement of KPIs for the circular economy with financial incentives that can then be reached. Also, can also be used for any types of circular economy industries and activities from energy and utilities to fashion, textiles, paper, and pharmaceuticals. On the next slide, I am going to talk a little bit about the alternative circular economy finance options that I mentioned earlier, which are usually used more for high risk and or low profit projects. We have public-private partnerships, shortened for PPPs, that are a project delivery tool employed by public entities that provide public infrastructure and or public services for long-term contractual arrangements that typically involve the private partner financing improvements and or services in return for long-term repayment. Either by governments or users. Then we have blended finance. It's called blended because it blends different types of capital, which can be from government aid, development, bank funds, private sector investments, so really any kind of capital. And the goal is to achieve both social and environmental impact, but also financial returns. And they can also include, the blended finance instruments can also include some risk reduction measures, for example, loss guarantees, concessional capital, or just guarantees to mitigate risk. Also insurance or technical assistance. And impact investing is more focused on generating social and environmental positive effects alongside the financial return, but impact investors might be willing to accept below market rate of return, so a lower profit in exchange for those positive social and environmental effects. which would be achieved with our circular economy projects due to lower environmental effects. Impact investing can be private equity, venture capital, or loans. So this impact investing just covers the goal of it mostly, but can be any kind of capital. On this slide, we are going to talk a little bit about the differentiation of circular economy. From what we heard earlier, it's still evolving. So the definitions are still evolving, like how to cluster it, how to differentiate. We can say that there is usually an investments in circular economy enabling framework, which can be anything from investing into regulation, policies, and the development of skills, analysis, but we also have we differentiated to also then the investment in circular economy related assets, which is invested in assets also prior to the circular economy project then, which can be aligned with loan finance, equity injections, leasing agreements, as well as, again, risk mitigation instruments, which can be essential. And the differentiation based on the circular economy business project definition can also be based on the possibility to ring fence the circular economy part of the business, or if this is not possible, if we have no possibility ring fence, and then it's a general purpose corporate finance. So circular economy, the volume based on the portion of the revenue or expenditure stream is contributing to circular economy. Then if it is possible to ring fence, then we have a defined use of proceeds. So the circular economy volume is based on investment amount that contributes to circular economy. And then we are mentioning again the sustainability linked bonds and loans. And the circular economy volume is based on either the defined use of proceeds or expected share of business that contributes to circular economy. So again, we have this linkage to the achievement of CE indicators or KPIs. That's mostly it. So I'm gonna hand now over to my colleague Hannah, who is going to give you some examples.
Yes, thank you very much, Nina, for all the information about the instruments and how they theoretically work. Yes, as you said, we're now going to try to put them into practice a little bit. So I'm going to start with some examples of how loan finance in the context of circular economy can look like. So, for example, EBRD has a circular economy regional initiative, which includes concessional co-financing in countries that also include Western Balkan economies for improving management of raw materials during the full life cycle of products and diverting waste from landfills and the marine environment, just to name some activities that are covered under this initiative. Then we also have from EIB reports about 2.5 billion in lending for circular projects over the last 5 years, such as collection and recycling infrastructure for waste, electrical and electronic equipment. But I'm sure the colleague who will be joining us later can give us the most updated numbers on that. And then another example from a private financial institution, the Italian Intesa San Paolo Banking Group, who manages a platform, a dedicated credit facility with a focus on innovative CE projects, which include, at this point in particular, Italian company solution for lifetime extension of goods and materials, as well as the regeneration of natural capital, such as restoration of degraded soils, and circular design with a focus on reducing waste and pollution. Then on the next slide, we would have some examples of bond financing. So yes, we can again see that EBRD is quite engaged in that, having issued 8 billion in green bonds, of which one of 2.3 billion euros in green transition bonds are more dedicated to circular economy elements by financing investments in circular manufacturing, including sectors like chemicals, cement and steel production. Again, we have also EIB as a front runner issuing their first sustainability awareness bond, which earmarks partially CE-related lending, including waste prevention, recycling, etc. And we also see that the World Bank is, of course, engaged in this by having issued a sustainable development bond, also referred to blue bonds, which in particular target plastic waste pollution in oceans. And we also here have a quote from a study done by EY, which have assessed over 150 green and sustainability bonds issued globally before 2022. And here they argue that over 80% of the sustainable bond proceeds are indirectly supporting circular practices. However, only 5% are particularly dedicated to circularity. So we see that there's still room for improvement and also really dedicating the proceeds to circular activities and not only having it as a byproduct, which is of course also already a good starting point. Yes. Then on the next slide, we have an example of a sovereign green bond. I think we're all aware that green bonds are also more commonly issued by governments to refinance their environment and climate expenditures. And here we have brought to you the example of Serbia, which was first Western Balkan economy to issue a green bond in September 2021. And here the necessary legal framework was produced in accordance with the standards of the International Capital Markets Association. 1 billion in its first sale of green bonds in the international markets was the amount of the bond, having also a 7-year maturity and 1% annual coupon security. And I think it can be said that the issuance of this first green bond was quite the success, with the bond being oversubscribed by more than 3 times. And looking at the use of proceeds of the green bond issued, we see that multiple activities were covered that also address circular economy considerations, including water and wastewater processing, flood prevention, pollution prevention control, waste management, and of course the support to overall energy efficiency measures in that regard. Then on the next slide, I'm going to talk about, take a bit of a sector perspective to maybe put all of what we've heard so far into the context of a particular sector and relevant material streams. And I think the sector of plastics is a sector that we can all more or less relate to, as we're engaging with plastic products knowingly and unknowingly every day. So what's the issue with plastics? That's probably not entirely new to you, but plastic is widely used in many sectors for good reason. However, the generation of plastic waste is strongly influenced by the lifetime and cost of the product. So we see that the main problem of short-term products is current waste generation, seeing that 96% of plastic packaging ends up as waste and is leaking into the environment. Then on the other hand, we have products with a long mean lifetime, like building products, with an average lifetime of about 35 years. But they create other problems in delaying crucial issues for the treatment of toxic and non-recyclable materials into the future. Therefore, for those applications, it's essentially important to rethink material composition and design. So what's an additional common problem with plastic products, and I mean thereby all of the plastic products, is their reliance and consumption of fossil resources. For example, in the US, we see that the plastic industry releases alongside its value chain at least 232 million tons of GHG emission each year, which is actually equivalent to 116 coal-fired power plants. So yeah, that's quite something, a considerable amount of GHG emissions. And we see another problem, which is the tremendous addition of partially problematic additives to enhance the material's performance, such as plasticizers, flame retardants, antioxidants, acid scavengers, light and heat stabilizers, and many more. I'm not going to go into all of them. However, these substances can migrate and they're being released into the environment and putting our ecosystems and our health at risk, but also they pose obstacles to recycling, which is why they're also particularly relevant for in the context of circular economy approaches. So on the next hand side, we have a graphic display of potential barriers and entry points for circular economy point of view in the sector of plastics. So I mean, this is very, I would say, general and probably true for many sectors, but maybe just as a way of thinking about it, can make sense to maybe look at barriers first for that are posed to CE implementation in the sector. So we see that we have poorly functioning markets without incentives for circularity. As I will go into detail a bit more later there, I mean the non-pricing of externalities, for example, pollution, which is commonly done. We have a lack of alternative materials, but also a lack of influence on imported products. We also additionally lack circular economy business models. And in many regions, we have established informal waste disposal, as well as poor management systems and high cost for the formal waste disposal. What can potential entry points to the sector can look like? So of course, we have enabling policy instruments that Olga has partially touched upon before, including incentives for circular material and product design. Of course, we need to scale up circular business models and develop alternatives to informal waste treatment to, in particular, also address the leakage problem of the plastic and its possibly toxic components. And we have to set up functioning treatment systems and finance those treatment systems. What can financial instruments look like that support the upscaling of CE in the plastics industry? I mean, I would argue that many of the instruments that were mentioned before, if designed properly, are suitable to support the uptake of CE in this industry. However, here are mentioned a few instruments that can be of particular help. We see that grant funding, of course, plays a crucial role, but so does technical assistance. We also need policy-based finance to enable an investment environment that's also suitable to take up financial flows dedicated towards the promoting CE in the plastics industry. We need investments also in early stages of innovations, for example, in particular in the regard of alternatives to single-use plastic packaging. Concessional loans play a role in particular for upcoming circular business models. Private-public partnerships, as Nina has mentioned, as well as circular procurement, and their governments and municipalities come into play. And so does circular and green bonds that specifically focus on plastic waste. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the barriers that still exist for the uptake of CE financing in particular, and that I already mentioned before, but existing market imperfections, such as not pricing in negative externalities, such as pollution, can reduce the profitability of the circular of the sector. And Nina, I think we cannot see the slides anymore. Maybe you could stick with the presentation. Yes, thank you. Yeah, which can all lead to underinvestment in sustainable circular activities, compared to a situation where we would not have those barriers or market imperfections. So how do these barriers look like that can potentially trigger those imperfections? So on the one hand, we have investments that require large upfront cost for circular infrastructure, which is in particular challenging for SMEs. But also we see a general lack of financial resources, budget constraints, but also limited access to credit facilities, which can be associated to missing track records. That's also in particularly relevant for SMEs and municipalities. In addition, we have identified a lack of available blending instruments that Nina has also touched upon before when it comes to risk mitigation, as well as market uncertainties. Those are, for example, related to uncertainties evolving around future generation of cash flows in regards to projects that are financed. And we have the presence of political uncertainty. So there it can be argued that we're missing credible commitments by public authorities, in particular governments, that pose additional risk on investment decisions and would potentially keep private investors from making those decisions. Also, in particular, when enforceable regulation is not in place. And then on the next slide, we have some insights from a recent meeting that was hosted by EU4Green in cooperation with RCC on the issue of circular economy relating to evolve, go circular. That was the motto of the meeting. And there were some particular bottlenecks identified for CE project financing in the context of the Western Balkans. But I think they're true for many, many regions. So on the one hand, we would have capacity constraints, which relate to the need of capacity building and technical assistance, but also awareness raising about the need for CE financing and more broadly, the need for supporting education on these topics. And then we also see that implementation poses many challenges, in particular arriving from strategies at concrete actions. And there it's just necessary that we develop policies, regulations, but also standards that can be held accountable in the context of project implementation. And then finally, it was also identified that ownership evolving around issues related to the environment in CE is still not as strong as it should be in order to really foster the uptake of CE activities, but also the financing for it in that regard. However, we don't only see barriers, but we also have solutions and enablers at hand. I think many of them were already discussed throughout this webinar, but maybe I can mention quickly a few innovative solutions that we would suggest in this context. So I think it's essential that we have tailored financial instruments that can be contract-based financing, but also digital traceability tools, which I think are essential for implementing CE activities. We also see new contractual and digital mechanisms, which can be related to results-based financing, but also, as heard before, CE dedicated green bonds, which are still only a minority of the green bonds being issued so far. We see on the level of ecosystem level solutions, the need for blended financing, but also reward-based crowdfunding can be an option. and what we call place-based financing mechanisms is related to the city and regional level, but also really the need to tie financing coming from cities and regions to measurable CE outcomes. What can potential enabler look like in this context? We still see a need for improved risk assessment methodologies, in particular to the field of CE financing, which is still novelty to many financial actors. We also identify the need for standardized CE performance indicators, in particular in the context of really tying finance to measurable outcomes. There we just need to develop further indicators which we can use to do so. We need proactive institutional stance towards financing the transition. So that would really be engaging in regulating and standardizing this field and also making clear that investment decisions being conducted in the long term are not risky. And what can be summarized under broader shift in finance culture is really taking ecosystems perspective also for financial institutions, which I think at this point is still lacking in many contexts. And then finally, again, from the meeting I mentioned with RCC, we have identified some success factors for CE financing in the Balkans. And therefore, it was really mentioned that capitalizing on existing processes is one key factor to success. So really making sure that lessons learned are taken into considerations, good practices are shared, and knowledge is exchanged. But also we see the importance of integrating local, but also social and economic dimensions into frameworks that address circular economy. And it was argued that framework conditions need to be in place, and that really is government strategies on all levels, so central, regional, and local, that address circular economy considerations, as well as action plans that include CE objectives and are essentially aligned with the EU CE action plan that Olga has presented earlier. So with that, I would say that we look at the questions that have already been posed in the chat. I think, Olga, maybe you have a better overview if there's still open question that we would have to discuss here, or I think many of them have also already been answered in the chat. Maybe
Yes,
you can give an overview.
Yes, I try to answer all the questions which were there, and thank you also for support from the GIZ for answering questions. I would like to read one comment because I understand that not everyone online can read the comments. The comment from GIZ in Kosovo, circular economy in our region often remains a policy narrative rather than a market driver. What are the most practical mechanisms such as green procurement, extended producer responsibility, or green finance that could make it operational at the municipal and SME level? Totally agree with this. There was a question about presentation sharing. Yes, the presentation will be shared at the website of EU4Green and recording of this webinar as well. Then another comment, EU-aligned taxonomy and ESG standards are key for unlocking sustainable finance in the Western Balkans, and capacity building must grow in parallel with financial instruments. We totally agree with this as well. And then there were a couple of questions. Does the EU foresee a dedicated instrument or program for financing municipal public enterprises in their transition towards the circular economy in Kosovo? So we had a couple of comments on that, in respect of WBAF's funds and EPA funds. However, I would like to invite the colleague from European Investment Bank, Gwen, to comment on it. I know he joined already.
I am here. You want me to comment on the EPA funds?
It's in the comments. The first question, does the EU foresee dedicated instruments or program for financing municipal public enterprises in their transition towards a circular economy in Kosovo? We comment the current answers to this are that there is no specifically dedicated funds because it's included under other programs, which include also other topics like climate adaptation or biodiversity, other topics, and also at member states level. Also, these funds are lacking, just purely circular economy dedicated. However, the way to explore for Western Balkans is to check how to get the IPA financing under WBIF, and to go to IFIs like EIB for advice and find financing.
That's my understanding too. Thank you, Olga. Indeed, I'm not aware that there are specific funds, but I can already say that I was a bit surprised seeing, for example, WBIF plans or project planned under that not having any waste management. At least maybe change, but at least the list of projects that we received in the bank as advisory for IPA countries, I have never seen any specific project on waste, municipal waste, for example. And that surprised me, for example, but that could be an entry point for these projects. On IPA 3 in general is an entry point for advisory, and to a certain extent, part of this if the cost allows and if the agreement allows.
Yes, and then there was a question also specifically on EIB, that also how can public enterprises better prepare to be competitive in applying for EIB financing, technical documentation, feasibility studies, environmental impact requirements?
Well, maybe, I mean, you will see in my presentation, I even put the three, let's say, entities that are under EIB. There is EIB, which is actually, I should have written EIB Group, which is divided in EIB, let's say, loan on funds, EIF, EIB, EIF. And then under EIB, there is EIB Advisory, which is technical assistance to prepare projects for loans. And there is JASPERS, which may cover loans, but usually covers EU grant preparation. So this is the service that the bank, in terms of technical advisory, offers to any public authority to prepare properly these projects. That indeed in Western Balkans, these would be usually public companies. It's not always the case in Europe, but in Western Balkans, these are usually public companies, and this is also a reason why when you asked me, I selected Croatia as an example that I thought relevant, because I thought, okay, the situation is very similar. They also have public companies. It's heavily, let's say, driven by public service, public authorities, and public companies. I'll come back maybe during my presentation, and we can further, if there are questions, clarify things.
Yes, thank you. Let's come back during your intervention, and then I will hand over now to my colleagues for the BICAS session. And afterwards, Glenn, we will invite you further to tell about the case study. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Olga. Yeah, in order to make this a bit more engaging, before we move on to the next presentation, we've prepared a little BICAS session for you. I think maybe the tool is new to you, but you probably know similar tools. They all work the same. So you can either go to mybicas.com and enter the session code, or you can scan the QR code with your phones, and you will arrive at the website where we will do the questions and the session. So maybe I give you just a little bit of time to join, and maybe Nina can tell, because she's seeing who has already joined, if we are arriving at adequate numbers in order to start with the questions that we have prepared for you. So we are already at the first question. You can still join. The session code is displayed on the top of the website. But yeah, we have prepared a first little quiz question on a topic that was addressed by Olga. So now you can already hint maybe on what might be the correct answer. So the question is, what of the following key product value chains is not addressed in the EU Circular Economy Action Plan from 2020? So we already have a few answers, and I would still invite you all to join this little fun activities. We're not gonna judge on right or wrong answers. It's more like to yeah, create a little engagement. But yeah, I think I can already say that most of you were right. Fossil fuels as a key product value chain is not included in the Circular Economy Action Plan. So good job for you guys who have selected this answer. And I think maybe also in respect of time, we can move on to the next question. And you are still, yeah, some of you have already submitted their answers. You can still join. It's mybcast.com and the session code is displayed on the top. And here the question was, in what sector do you see the greatest potential in your economy for the uptake of circular economy activities? So we see that some answers have already arrived. We see waste management, waste prevention, also in the construction sector as important topics. Also plastics, as discussed before, and water management, water reuse, of course, is a big issue. Yeah, there we can see waste management, I think, is very relevant to most of us. And the prevention, of course, is also a big part of the sector, not only managing, but also like initially preventing the waste from being created. Yeah, construction waste is a big issue also in sectors where there's now so much being built, and we just need to look at the materials that we're being using and how they can be recycled in the future when the building is being replaced at some point. Yes, plastic and waste management come out as big, so I think many of us can relate to those sectors. Maybe if we move on to the next question here, there was now we can also see the results already. But yeah, the question was to match the following bond times with the use of proceeds, as was presented by Nina before. So I hope you all did this individually. So we can see that common use of proceeds differ for green bonds, transition bonds, and sustainability-linked bonds. And yeah, I think that's just important to also take into consideration when we think about bonds and how they relate to sustainability, and also in particular to circular economy considerations and perspectives. So yeah, thank you for participating. And I think we have a final open question, I believe. Yes, so the question there was, where do you see the biggest barriers in your economy to circular economy activities? So yeah, that can be very open, so just whatever comes to your mind, submit it. So we see high implementation costs. Yeah, that's of course also something that we touched upon in our presentation before, that the initial cost can be quite significant and yeah, require quite significant investments, for example, when it comes to waste treatment plants, etc. And yeah, the lack of legislation and the required infrastructure is, of course, a significant barrier. Corruption, unfortunately, exists and can also tamper with the implementation of it. And lack of financial incentives, I think, yeah, I think for the example of plastic can be is very true. Just for not pricing in those externalities and just like not having the financial incentives necessary to rebuild your business model, as plastic unfortunately is still, in particular single-use plastic, is still working very well. Great. I think you have come up with many interesting perspectives and insights. We still have some new ones coming in, so yeah, feel free to submit them further. We will leave the PCast open, but in order to not steal more time from our colleague from EIB who's joining us today and who will provide some very interesting practical insights, I would hand over to Glenn, and yeah, looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. There are all the two questions that pop up while you were speaking in the chat. I don't know, Olga, if you want me to start with these, actually.
I think we have
a bit addressed to me
yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, I think we can leave them maybe for the end and collect some more questions. And because we have a dedicated Q&A session for you at the end of your presentation, and maybe you will answer them already.
To be quick. You move the slides and I say next one. That's the okay. We will do like that. Then I'll thank you everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone for joining the meeting and being interested in this topic. I'll try to be quick, and then maybe we keep Q&A longer, so maybe it's more interesting. I started with a picture, obviously, that usually depicts the current situation in many of IPA 3 countries, if I may say like that. I don't want to offend anyone, but this is usually a situation that is often seen when you go around, and it's a landfill, obviously, a non-compliant landfill usually, and that's the starting point for many municipalities. I'll focus a bit on municipal waste rather than, let's say, industrial waste, but we can touch upon industrial later on. And that's what we want to avoid in the future. We want to move from this because we want to change. And to link a bit with your presentation before, I thought the idea of presenting a case study taken from Croatian example, which is close to IPA 3 countries, was indeed capitalizing on good practices and lessons learned. So basically, what I wanted to say here is that Croatia is a good example, and you will see that at the end, actually, because I did my presentation a bit the other way around. At the end, I explained why I took Croatia. But let's go through then the example of Croatia and these famous regional recovery and recycling facilities that we are trying to promote in Croatia. So what are these? These are actually, as the word says, regions. They serve several municipalities or counties in the case of Croatia. Not all the countries do have counties, but let's say you at least have some regions. Why regional? Because what you want is to have an economy of scale. You don't want to do small facilities that usually would not be really economically and financially viable, let's say, in that sense. So that's why I insist on region. And on the recovery, on the recycling, that actually should be the other way around. I see I did a typo, but it's okay. It doesn't really matter. Usually first recover and then you recycle. That's why I usually would say recovery and recycling facilities. Obviously, because also I insist on that, because in many countries, when they move from, and that's independent of IPA 3 or whatever, every time when you move from dumping waste to something better, the first reaction is let's do incineration. Obviously, incineration and incinerators, they are not going to help you to have circular economy. On the contrary, they were identified by the Commission as usually do significant harm. Not always, but it could be that an incinerator would be labeled as do significant harm to circular economy. We consider these facilities as integrated. Sometimes we call them even integrated waste management facilities because they are meant to treat both mixed waste and separately collected waste. And that's what you need if you want to reach circular economy targets, meaning that you need to start with usually bio-waste at least, and if possible, dry recyclables. And they are flexible. That's why also they are good for transition, because on next slide, please, I'll explain you in the next slide. They are flexible in the sense that they will allow you basically with one design capacity to over years, as you roll out separate waste collection, to use the capacities of the facility for the treatment of non-mixed waste, so separately collected waste. And that's what a bit I wanted to depict here. Here I took actually, as I said, an example, which is a real example from Croatia with real waste inputs and generation. So in this case, the waste facility will have, as you see, they will roll out under number one, they will roll out more separate waste collection, which in theory, the first dots that you see, I don't think you see my cursor, you can't see it, but basically the first line over the number one is the line that would be typically the the treatment capacity. So what will happen over years is that if you design a classic MBT, you will have overcapacity. But if you design these kind of facilities where you have the flexibility, where you should be able to switch from mixed to dry recyclables in shifts or in organizational, let's say, sense, you would be able to take dry recyclables, or here in this case, what you see is green is the bio waste, but okay, it doesn't matter. That's the first thing you will do. You will do basically in that facility two lines, one for treating the biodegradable residues of mixed waste, and a separate line, because that's EU legislation, to treat separately collected bio-waste. And if you have a sorting line, you will try to make that sorting line flexible enough to treat in one shift, let's say, mixed waste, and in another shift, dry recyclables. By doing so, you avoid overcapacity of what you built over years, because obviously when you start, you might need only mixed waste because you don't have yet the full separate waste collection. You will make better use of your equipment because over years, as you roll out separate waste collection, you will be able to use the full capacity. If necessary, you can, if you design to work in one shift over years, maybe you will switch, you do some upgrades and switch to two shifts and be able to take everything that is, let's say, generated in that catchment area region. And by doing so, on the number 4, what I wanted to say here is that you will probably, it will help you to reach the targets. Okay, you will do that because obviously you will have a certain moment if you join the EU or if you have in your IKE already some targets, it will help you to reach the targets. Usually, I think you have that defined in chapter 27, if I'm not mistaken. You have let's say, a timeline to reach certain targets to little by little be at the level of the EU IKE. Next slide, please. So when you do this kind of facilities, which would be for municipal waste, so on here I link to a question that I see, it doesn't matter if a public company or private company will deal with that municipal waste, because actually the waste is municipal, but a municipality can actually transpose, if I may say, the responsibility of treating the waste to a private company through an open tender, for example. So basically, what matters is that when you plan this kind of facilities, you have, first of all, that links also to what you were saying before, a good framework to do, and that's strategy, plan, and program. So there is a responsibility, governmental responsibility of the administration in each country to prepare a strategy on the plan, on the program that are interlinked, and where that project will have its place, will be identified, and will have a funding, let's say, identified. That's very important to be successful, because that's a bit of a question. And then when you prepare that, and I'll come back later, you will need a good feasibility study. Here I put some attention points. They are not the only one. I also put at the end the polluter pays principle. I think now, because of the question, it's important also to understand that if if you start to treat waste that is not municipal, like construction and demolition, it was mentioned before, you might have to apply the polluter pays principle. It might be under EPR. It's going to be a bit more difficult. So these things, they have to be somehow defined in a way that is, I mean, legally defined. They have to have a framework. Usually in Europe, in the European Union, we apply the polluter pays principle, meaning that the treatment of this type of wastes will need full cost recovery, meaning that usually you would not be able to spend public money on that if it's not compliant with stated rules. So you can do that, but you will need to comply with stated rule. Okay. I will not speak more. You see, I will not read what's on the slide, so we can move on the next slide. And if you have questions, we can come back. So I insist, there is a big part of responsibility, if I may say like that. I don't want to put pressure on anyone, that lays on the authorities, on the public authorities. There is a need to prepare a strategy that was done, for example, in Croatia here in 2006. You see, it's quite old, but it doesn't matter. The strategy is anyway a document that needs to set a long-term or broader vision, let's say, in that sense. And in that strategy, the Croatian authorities, they did something good. They defined that they want regional waste management centers, new type twice center. Doesn't matter. Then lately, what they did also, they defined, as they have to, a national waste management plan. That's something that EIB, because there were a question also what we can do. For example, EIB did that also with Montenegro. We supported Montenegro in defining the national waste management plan. So here the Croats, they have done so. And in that national waste management plan, they clearly define targets. It's shorter term, and they define also the means to achieve these targets. In this case, they you can identify recovery and recycling facilities in the plan in a way, at least the project we are speaking about. And then obviously you need a program. In the case of Croatia, the program is 21-27 on. It's clearly defined that these, let's say, centers, these waste management centers or recovery and recycling facilities will benefit from EU grants. Next slide, please. All these first steps are very important. And as I said, then will come the feasibility study that I spoke before. And then I wanted here to highlight some maybe why I speak about Croatia, like maybe I can we take some current examples in IPA 3 countries. Actually, as I said, I haven't seen anyone submitting any so far, at least not via Jaspers. And I thought that the Croatian example is very relevant. Actually, I think there is a colleague from Croatia online, and I invite you also to communicate with Croatian authorities directly, not necessarily through me. I think you have a lot to learn from them, because obviously Croatia was once upon a time part of the same state as many of you were. And you started from a similar background, you have a similar public service, you face similar problems that Croatia used to face and is now moving from. And as I said, you need a regional center because you want to move from, you want the economy of scale. You wouldn't do a center for 30,000 tons. I mean, me as an engineer, I wouldn't recommend that. It would not be economically or financially sustainable maybe for the citizens, because you need to link it to the affordability. You need something also that is affordable for your citizens, that they will be able to pay. Okay, and all these things are very important. I think the example of Croatia in that sense is very relevant, and you can learn a lot from them. And I invite you actually to be more curious on ask them directly, maybe even, if I may, Branka. I think Branka is online. And yeah, that's about this. As I said here, it's important sometimes also to see maybe what in Croatia, for example, in Croatia, contrary to Romania, the public service is only collection right now. So the projects that are focused on treatment without the collection on treatment. So maybe there you need to see what's best suited for you, for your specific case, in your specific even maybe region, or in your specific country, depending on how you want to set the responsibilities. I insist once again, also be careful with state aid. I don't know how much each of your countries advance in this topic, but at the moment in the EU, there is this stated aspect, which is very important. You need to spend public money in a compliant way with stated rules. So either you are, let's say, free from state aid because it's considered as a non-state aid scenario. It can be the case if there is no market. We could argue that there is no state aid because you don't disturb the market. But if there is a market and you start to disturb the market, it might be a problem. It might be a problem, especially for we. I remember a meeting that I had with maybe some of you, organized in Vienna with UNEP, and many of your, let's say, countries were interested in developing a regional treatment facility for waste from electronics and electronic equipment. In that case, that might be relevant. Next slide, please. So next slide, that's just in the two. No, that's.
Apologies, I think that we have now a problem with this slide.
But
because
otherwise, I can share it if you allow me. I can do it. I have it open.
That would be great, please. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I'll do it then. No problem. Here it is. Slide. Just let me put it in the display settings. Okay. I don't know why I don't have any more the full screen, but okay, let's do like that. My apologies. Huh?
No, it's our apologies that we.
I don't know why I don't have the usual.
You can click on
It's
this.
the button on the right that like it's presentation mode.
Maybe I don't see it because wait, I have first. Apologies for the technical issues. I have first to. Here it is. Yeah,
the last one on the.
Yeah, I was not seeing it was behind your. You see it correctly?
Yes,
right now?
yes, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that's basically
Thank you.
that these slides should maybe have been in the beginning. But it's what I was saying before, and some of you were interested in is how can EIB or actually even EIB advisory on Jaspers help. You need to understand EIB has basically two big services to offer. One is advisory, and it's done through EIB advisory. Jaspers being part of EIB advisory under the specific mandate of Jaspers, for example, but we have also IPA 3 mandates now that are different mandates. So for you, it doesn't matter. We can provide you the service of advisory. So we can guide you and help you to develop the feasibility study or to set the strategy or to work on the plan, the national waste management plan. So all these things, how to do that, we can help you basically, and we can help you at certain moment if needed to apply for a new grant. And then what we can do on the top of that is for certain projects, if you decide to apply for, in addition to the EU grant, financial support from the EIB, we can either blend our financial support with that EU grant, providing that obviously you pass the successful due diligence of the bank, or we can, if you don't have an EU grant, directly provide a loan, which can be direct or indirect. I don't want to enter in many details, but usually we would not, as a bank, when we provide a direct loan, cover the whole costs. You know, the usual scenario, we cover 50% of the eligible costs or the project costs, and we would not cover, for example, things like land acquisition because we avoid land speculation, for example, just an example. And that's it from my side, I think. So if you have questions, maybe it's better to spend on questions. I'll go out so I can see actually, sorry, I go out so I can see if there are questions popping in the chat. Mm-hmm. And if there is a need to go back to the presentation, let me know.
Thank you, Glenn. I think that we have one person raised the hand.
Yes.
So maybe we just open the floor just to speak up. Can you unmute yourself, please, Elsa?
Elsa, we don't hear you.
I think from the settings, it might be possible that she cannot unmute herself. Can you check?
maybe drop a message at least in the chat. In the meantime, if you allow me, we can go back to the question of Kemal.
Yeah, just let's go to the question of Kemal, and let me check whether we can.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's about CBAM on the plan of EIB to support for the alignment with CBAM. Okay, CBAM is about rather CO2 than circular economy, but there it's a bit out of my, let's say, knowledge, but I think that we can, if it's about developing strategies on how to align on these things, I believe that there are advisory services within the bank. It would not be me, but it will be someone else in the bank that would be able to help on. And usually it goes through what we call managing authorities in member states. It's contact person, or what's the name? I forgot the other acronym for IPA 3 countries, but basically it's someone in a ministry that is in charge of helping setting it and discussing with us. And that's a bit also about cooperation. So, okay, we as a bank, we are usually asked to help member states, or now in this case, IPA 3 countries, to develop projects. These projects, they can be developed with local authorities or private companies. We don't look at that from that perspective. We don't make a specific selection. You know, we don't say we work only with local authorities or only with private companies. In any case, we would do that through developing the project together, working on the feasibility study. Usually they would have consultants that would help. We are very hands-on. We don't, in case of circular economy and waste, we tend to not delegate that. So we are not going to tell you, we are going to do a, we are going to hire someone from outside and then help. You know, we have usually expertise to do so on the ground. The only thing is, do we have time? Sometimes we are overbooked, but usually we try to be fast, as fast as we can. I'm waiting for other questions. I don't see any now popping up.
Okay, Elsa, can you pose your question, please, in the chat?
In general, if I may, I really insist on the fact that it's important, first of all, to understand that incineration will not help you in waste management to reach circular economy targets. It will help you to get rid of a certain amount of wastes and not landfill them. Okay, so I'm not against incineration. It's complementary to whatever else you will put in place, but it's not going to be circular economy. If you want circular economy and you need the targets, you will need to work on facilities that will be able to recover and recycle materials. And to do so, you need a good framework. So you need to prepare well your strategy, your plan, and sometimes even the stated issues. You need to have maybe a program on how you decide to distribute public money, why it's compatible, why you can do that. You need to usually to do some market analysis to demonstrate that there is a market failure. And the bank itself will not be able to provide a loan if there is no market failure or it is no additionality. That's something I think I have forgotten to say, but the bank is not a commercial bank. It provides a loan only if there is an additionality. So if there are benefits for the society of doing the project, and the project will not be done without us. So you have to see the bank as a bridge when it gives a loan, and to see it also maybe as a bridge or facilitator when it provides advisory services.
Thank you for your insights, Glenn. We have one more question. Since circular economy is one out of 6 EU taxonomy objectives, alignment with do no significant harm is critical. Does the EIB offer technical or advisory support to help Western Balkan countries achieve this alignment in project preparation?
As far as I know, yes. it's one again. I would not be the one helping you on that, but yes, my colleagues do that as far as I know.
Great, thank you. I also have a question. You mentioned already the experience with circular economy projects in the Western Balkans, that you don't see many applications. Could you maybe tell in general in your work in Western Balkans, maybe other observations that you could share specifically on circular economy projects?
Well, I mean, we have, as I said, I personally had 2 projects where I was involved. One was, if I may name them, I mean, I guess, yes. One was in Montenegro. We worked with the authorities of Montenegro for the National Waste Management Plan. I think it's very important to have a good National Waste Management Plan in place, and also it's a good opportunity to test how much your system that you plan will be financially viable and economically viable. So you would do a kind of macro affordability test or whatever of what you want to do, because in all these countries, usually right now, the fees paid by the users are very low, and whatever system you will put in place is going to cost more. And that's usually an issue, especially if you are lower income country, right? So it's why it's important, what I said before, to set an affordability threshold. Usually you will set, you as a competent authority, someone will say, okay, I can afford to spend, let's say, between 1% and 2% on waste from the income of my citizens. All these details are important. In Belgrade, for example, we are also working there. Obviously, Belgrade has a big incinerator that was done without the EIB. And right now, they are trying to create a more circular waste management system. And obviously, it's competing with the incinerator. It's why I was insisting, be careful with incinerators. They are complementary, but they should not, let's say, be overdimensioned, if I may say like that. Otherwise, you will then be in big problems in the future. So be careful if you plan to do an incinerator right now. Be careful to not take this project of incineration as an independent project. Unfortunately, waste is a very complex, municipal waste is a very complex topic where usually you need to think broadly on everything together to make good decisions. So you need to have in your mindset where I want to be long term. Do I want to be at 50, let's say, % recycling? In that case, how much waste do I have now? Do I generate? How much I will generate in the future? And then you say, okay, I can afford to have an incinerator, for example, if it doesn't exceed the 50%, let's say, waste generation. Otherwise, you are going to start to not have the necessary waste for the recovery and recycling because you will have to send it to the incinerator. And really strategic thinking from the beginning is very important.
Thank you. And also EIB can help with strategic thinking with advisory.
Yes, definitely we can.
So,
it's part of this advisory service that we can provide.
Thank you, Glenn. Your contribution was very insightful for our seminar. Now we can move to the closing remarks. Thank you. Thanks so much. We can move to closing remarks and wrap up because we are already like 5 minutes over the time. So I would like just to summarize from our discussion today that circular economy finance definition is still evolving, and the work of international finance institution on standardization provides really solid basis for navigating this complex field. And really the international finance institution should be like the first entities to go if you need advice and support for developing circular economy projects for financing. And the regulatory environment of circular economy creates demand, and mobilizing more financing for circular economy projects. Therefore, for Western Balkans, it's so important to have the reforms on circular economy and have everything reflected and aligned with EU acquis. circular economy investment gap is significant. It represents an opportunity, and the assessment of circular economy investment gap is still the methodologies are developing. The EU funding programs support circular economy activities and projects. Also, WBF financing and IPA funding supports circular economy activities. However, there is no only circular economy dedicated program or instrument developed. And there are multiple financial instruments, as the review was provided by my colleagues on capital market and lending side. Also, everything can be used for circular economy projects. And alternative financing options, innovative finance, shall be considered in case of economically non-viable projects. There are barriers to circular economy finance, but there are also solutions and enablers of it. They are evolving. And we have prepared also the list of links you can find in our presentation what we used, but also just in general that it makes sense to check those links if you are interested in circular economy financing. Thank you so much for your participation, and please visit our website. The recording presentation will be on the website, as well as other information on upcoming activities. Thanks a lot and have a nice day.
Thank you.